we go.
Thanks. Well, hello again, everybody. It's nice to talk to you all again. This time it's about a topic some of you may have already heard me speak on in one way, in some venue.
Never.
Except for my children. How many of you have ever heard me talk at you about pro-life stuff? Okay. A little less than half, so I might repeat some things for those of you who have heard me talk before. I'm sorry. Just look at me and act like you're paying attention. Like Chris said, I have been in the pro-life world for a long time. Way back when I was a high schooler, actually, is when I first got started volunteering, helping my own mother, who was the president of the New Jersey chapter of something called Citizens Concerned for Life. From there, I kind of always stayed in the pro-life movement, and not always because I wanted to. Sometimes it's just kind of what happened. I was a sidewalk counselor outside of a Planned Parenthood in Pittsburgh when I was in college. That was a pretty contentious time. There were a couple times I got a little bit beat up out front of the abortion clinic there till we started videotaping. I'm happy to say that Planned Parenthood is closed, so that's great. From there, I went on to get married and have my own children, and we ended up moving our whole family into a maternity home where I was the house director. So we lived with women who found themselves homeless and in need of a place to live, and they were pregnant. Similar to New Eve, but ours was outside of Baltimore, so all of our clients came from inner city Baltimore. And that was very interesting. From there, Chris was in the military, we moved around a little bit, and I stayed plugged in different ways. I was the executive director of the Guiding Star Project, which is a holistic women's health organization, and I'm still connected with them. And then I ended up, through the Guiding Star Project, I ended up meeting Abby Johnson, becoming friends with her, and working eventually for her organization, and then there were none. And then there were none's mission was to help abortion clinic workers leave their jobs in the industry and find new work, find healing, find hope. And so I worked directly with quite a few, mostly women. I only had one male client, and I had close to 100 female clients. They would leave the industry and come to us for help. And even now, I'm still in different ways involved. So when I talk to you today about being pro-life, about what it means to be pro-life, particularly in this kind of strange situation we find ourselves in, where Roe versus Wade, who you've all grown up hearing about, right? How many of you have been to the March for Life? Okay, so at some point someone would do that horrible chant that gets stuck in your head, the hey, hey, ho, ho, Roe v. Wade has got to go, that one. And yeah, you want to bash your head on the side of the bus, because it won't leave your head. So it happened, right? You're never going to have to hear that chant again, so that's really good news. But what exactly does that mean? And that's kind of the conversation everyone's having now. Well, what does this mean? We've heard about this Roe v. Wade making abortion care the law of the land, meaning it somehow granted a constitutional right to women to have an abortion. Now that that's been overturned because of the Dobbs case, there is no longer a constitutional protection for abortion. There is no longer a federal anything. Federal meaning the entire United States, right? There's nothing federal that protects a woman's right to have an abortion, or that says she can or can't. What happens now that Roe versus Wade has been overturned and there's no longer this federal umbrella over the issue of abortion, is that it's up to each and every state to decide what its laws regarding abortion are. And so I don't know how closely you've been following some of the pro-life news, but maybe you've noticed that in Mississippi, the last abortion clinic had to close. There are no abortion clinics in Mississippi. Well, that's because Mississippi has really strict laws that govern abortion. In West Virginia, there's a fight right now because West Virginia never thought Roe versus Wade was going to be overturned. And so there was an 80-year-old law on their books that outlawed abortion. And so now there is currently a fight of whether or not that's going to change or whether that's going to stay, which means abortion's illegal in West Virginia. Here in Virginia, our former governor passed very sweeping pro-abortion legislation. The House passed a whole bunch of bills, and that governor, our former governor, signed it. Because of that, here in Virginia, nothing really changed. When Roe versus Wade was overturned, it was business as usual here. Abortions are still happening. Abortions are still legal in the state of Virginia, and there aren't any restrictions on them. Nothing changed. So that's kind of the way the whole country is. Depending on the state, the laws are going to look different. Now, this creates a whole other host of problems that people are talking about. Things like, okay, pause. I love you. Love you.
I'll say hi.
Okay, thank you. Gabriel.
Hi, Gabe. Bye, Gabe. Bye, Amy. Thomas? Is he on the Did you want him?
Let me know when you're bored.
Did you find what?
Thank you.
Bye, Kaylee. Oh! Bye!
All right, unpause. Sorry, I had to be mom. So right now, the conversation in the country is really polarized. There's a lot of anger. There's a lot of misunderstanding surrounding abortion. And there's a lot of uncertainty about what it means, particularly for women. And so that's kind of the direction I want to go. And I gave you my little brief resume, so you know the kind of the perspective that I'm coming from. Working with former abortion clinic employees, workers, and these would be women who helped perform the abortions. In some of the abortion clinics, there was technically a doctor, but in some cases it was my clients who were not even registered nurses who were actually performing the abortions, doing the procedures themselves. Working with these employees who have seen every aspect of this abortion industry, it gave me a bit of a unique perspective, because most of them, when they would come to us and when I would talk to them as a client manager, they weren't pro-life. It's not like they called us because they had a giant pro-life epiphany and had all of a sudden decided they were pro-life. No, they just knew that they couldn't do what they were doing anymore, and it was really confusing for them because they were coming to us, the enemy, right? These pro-life people that they've been told are mean, are nasty, they lie, they coerce you, they don't care about you, they just care about babies. They really believed this. And so when these workers would come to us, we kind of had to establish some trust. But in doing that, it gave me a little bit of an insight into how people who are pro-choice, particularly the women, really think and what they think about us as pro-life people. They think we're crazy sometimes. They think that we don't care about them. We think that we don't care if they live or die, we just want the baby to be born. Have you ever heard people throwing around the slogan, you're not pro-life, you're just pro-birth? That's where that comes from. Right? So there's a lot of misunderstanding and a lot of mistrust. And all this is kind of coming to the surface now. Now that women actually believe, they actually believe they aren't going to have access to health care. Women are actually believing that they are going to be forced to die if their life is in danger because of a pregnancy. They believe that they're not going to get health care if they miscarry. They believe that if there is a problem with the pregnancy that could cause further complications, that they're not allowed to seek intervention that would save their lives. This is what women now believe. They think that if they use a fertility app on their phones, that the government is going to spy on their feminine cycles and use it to prosecute them if they have a miscarriage. This is really what people are believing. And so when you see all this kind of anger and you see people getting really worked up over this issue, a lot of it's coming from a place of fear. A lot of it is coming from a place of not understanding, number one, what it means to be pro-life. Number two, their bodies. Number three, the autonomy of the little human being who may be growing there. And so that's kind of where we need to start addressing the issue of being pro-life in this post-Roe world. You know, years ago, the argument was, it's just a clump of cells. Nobody really knew any different. Just a clump of cells. Okay, well you could sell that, no pun intended. You can laugh at that. There you go, thank you. Right, you can sell that to someone if you've never seen an ultrasound. If the science of embryology hadn't developed to the point that it's at now, you could believe, okay, there's just a clump of cells. At some point, yeah, I guess it becomes a human, but we don't really know when. You could convince someone. But we can't, that argument doesn't work anymore. Because we have ultrasound, because we have science and technology that has literally proven that from the moment of conception, a unique life form, human life form, is developing with different DNA and a completely autonomous body systems. So the clump of cells argument doesn't work anymore. It's not a human argument doesn't work anymore. Not when you have secular textbooks that teach embryology saying, no, at the moment of conception, there's a unique human life form. Person would be another word for that. And so now we have to kind of escalate the way we talk about being pro-life because the old arguments don't work anymore. And now we're in this totally new reality where really it's all about fear. It's all about misunderstanding. It's all about not knowing the definitions of things. And it's about women not understanding how their bodies work. That's where we're at. And so to kind of counteract some of those common lies that are out there, the one that says if you're in a state that's outlawed abortion, it means that women who have miscarriages are going to be put in jail. No. Okay, that's just not true. But here's where they get that idea. On medical paperwork, any sort of pregnancy loss is defined as an abortion. We have what they call a spontaneous abortion. That's a miscarriage. Then there's elective abortion. That's when a woman chooses to go and kill her child. In the medical term, both use abortion. And so people who honestly don't know any better look at all of these talking points and all of the lies that are being thrown out there and think, oh my gosh, if abortion is illegal, that must mean miscarriages are illegal too because those are spontaneous abortions. No. The answer to that, should you be confronted with that argument, is Roe versus Wade only ever dealt with elective abortion. Therefore, the conversation is still only about elective abortion, the abortion you choose to have. Does that make sense? In addition to that, right, women are thinking that if their life is in danger, that they are not going to be able to make a medical decision that could save their life. This argument comes because throughout the years that abortion has been protected by Roe versus Wade, there have been attempts by pro-life politicians or politicians who say that they're pro-life to pass legislation that would limit abortion. But each and every piece of legislation that was passed and became law, they all included a little tagline that said, except for in the cases of rape, incest, and the danger to the life of the mother. So in other words, anywhere in the country, whether it was state or federal, if there was pro-life law that was going to be passed that was going to limit abortion somehow, it would have all the language about what it was doing. It was limiting abortion in this situation and up until this many weeks and this gestation and all of their technicalities. And then at the bottom it would say, except for in the cases of rape, incest, and danger to the life of the mother. Now, the sad thing is that's a backdoor way of keeping abortion free and accessible to everybody. It's also a really slimy way to say that a human being who is conceived in violence, a human being who is conceived in maybe a horrible circumstance, has less worth than somebody else. That's really what that means. You know, one of my dear friends adopted a child who was conceived because of a violent attack. He's worth every bit as much as my own children, as you. The circumstances of his conception do not define his worth, right? And yet, we've legislated worth. We've said those people, those babies, those little persons don't matter as much. It's okay to kill them. That's what that legislation did. But because of that exception clause, the danger to the life of the mother part has stuck with women. And so now that abortion is no longer federally protected, women think, oh my gosh, if my life is somehow threatened by a pregnancy, let's say it's an ectopic pregnancy, meaning the baby got lost and implanted somewhere he or she wasn't supposed to, a fallopian tube or an ovary. Now sometimes that can cause major damage to a woman. Women believe that a procedure that could be done that would protect her life, that may, unfortunately, also end up with the baby no longer being viable, that would be illegal. That's not true. It's never illegal, it's never wrong to attempt to save the life of the mother, because any doctor also has a responsibility to try to save the life of the child. You always try to save them both. Sometimes that's not possible. Sometimes an indirect result of attempting to save the mother's life is that the baby doesn't make it. That's not the same thing as directly killing that baby. Does that make sense? We call that principle in Catholic moral theology the principle of double effect. But when you're talking to someone who doesn't understand, what you can tell them is, no, in medicine, it's never illegal to try to save your patient's life. When a mom is pregnant, there are two people that a doctor attempts to save. But if only one makes it, that's not against the law. And that's how you refute that argument. But now do you kind of see where some of this fear is coming? Now women are being taught that pregnancy is scary, that it's something that could kill them, and that they couldn't even save themselves were they to get pregnant. What a lie. How horrible. Instead of telling women, hey, your bodies are pretty awesome. They're made to grow and sustain another human being. That's a superpower. It doesn't limit you, right? It's not a threat to your happiness or your well-being, your ability to be a human person in this day and age. That's your superpower, right? But that's not what women are hearing. Women are hearing, now that Roe versus Wade is no longer federally protected, you're gonna die. That's what women are hearing. And so it becomes necessary as a pro-life people to be able to speak to those fears, to acknowledge those fears, and to have compassion. You know, this is supposed to be the summer of rage, right? There are all these different groups who have decided that they are going to attack pro-life people, especially Catholics, that are going to cause violence and disruption to primarily Catholics and those who are pro-life, because they're so angry that they can't kill their children. Right? How twisted is that? When you say it like that, it sounds really dark and twisted. But that's the reality of it. And yet this rage is coming from a place of fear and of misunderstanding. And you know what? It's also coming from a place of evil. Abortion, at its core, is evil. It's the destruction of a human being who's made in the image and likeness of God. It's a sacrilege. We can talk about it as a political issue, all we want. We can talk about it as a social issue, all we want. We can learn how to combat some of the lies and how to talk to someone with logic. But at the end of the day, it's an issue between good and evil, the demonic and the angelic, Satan and God. That's what it is. And so the best thing you can do as you seek to be and to live the reality of being pro-life, as you encounter people who aren't, is make sure you're praying. I'm convinced the only reason Roe versus Wade was overturned, and we can at least start on a path towards, hopefully, more and more states becoming pro-life, is because people finally got on their knees. I could work with as many abortion clinic workers as humanly possible, and it wouldn't end abortion. It would hopefully help them. It would help them find healing and help them find their faith and help them become the person they were created to be, but it wasn't going to end abortion. There's always going to be somebody else to take the job at Planned Parenthood that somebody else filled. The only way abortion ends and continues to end is if we are praying for it too, if we're willing to sacrifice for it too, and if we're willing to first talk to God, then talk to other people. You know, we kind of live in this era where we love the gotchas. You know, like we all want to be, I don't know, Matt Walsh or Taylor Marshall or Ben Shapiro. And he actually does talk that fast, by the way. Like, even in conversation, he doesn't stop talking fast. So we're used to this sort of like shocking one-liner, I'm going to change your mind with this brilliant thing that's coming out of my mouth right now, and I won, mic drop, right? And that's kind of what we're used to. It's part entertainment. And it kind of makes us feel good too. Isn't it just nice to see someone totally own someone else when they're saying what you believe? You can say yes. I mean, it is. Yeah. But the reality is that doesn't win people over. It might shut them up. You know, if you're publicly humiliated, or if you're outworded by somebody who's got a bigger vocabulary than you, or someone who's talking so fast you can't get a word in edgewise and they claim victory before you can say anything, your heart hasn't changed. You haven't all of a sudden had this epiphany where you're like, oh yeah, now that you talked at me so fast and you said that semi-insulting thing, I'm totally pro-life now. It doesn't work like that. You win people over. You help them make that conversion from being pro-choice to pro-life through your prayers first, through talking to your angel and having your angel talk to theirs. Our angels are great at that. Send your angel to talk first. They pave the way. But also through how we love them. You know, Scripture tells us love covers a multitude, right? Working with abortion clinic workers, I got to see that really clearly. That I couldn't change their minds about what it meant to be pro-life or pro-choice. It wasn't even my job to outline for them everything that they did that was wrong. They knew. It was my job to love them. And in loving them, they learned how to love themselves. Then they learned how to let me love them. Then they learned how to let God love them. And that's when they would become pro-life. So you might not ever have an interaction with somebody where you get the satisfaction of getting to walk away from that conversation and think, I won that one. They're pro-life now. You might not ever. But you might get to encounter a person who might be very angry, very confused, ragey. And in that moment, you can choose to love them and be compassionate and kind, and absolutely not the picture of the weirdo pro-lifer that they have painted in their head. And that's what might start them on the road to rethinking things. It's love. It's love and prayers. That's how we end abortion. We're never going to argue our way out of it. But it is important to be educated about it. And so that's why knowing sort of the lay of the landscape now, that everything is state by state by state, right? That's good for you to know. Because that's an educational thing. Oh my gosh, abortion's outlawed everywhere. Oh, well, where do you live? Virginia. Well, then it's actually not in Virginia. Do you even know what you're talking about? Nope. Right? So you can educate. Oh my gosh, Roe versus Wade is no longer the law of the land. It means that if I get pregnant and I have a miscarriage, I could get put in jail. No, I'm so sorry that you were lied to and that you've been scared about that. But here, let me explain to you what the real situation is. A miscarriage isn't illegal. It never was. It's not going to be. Right? I have to delete all my fertility apps because the federal government is looking through my fertility app to see how my cycle works, and if it doesn't look right, they're going to think that I miscarried and they're going to put me in jail. Not even joking, I actually heard that argument from somebody. First of all, the federal government could care less about your fertility. Second of all, if the government was actually going to spend the money to create a fertility app task force, that would be super stupid. And we're not going to do it, right? Third, most people don't know about their fertility, so the people on the fertility app task force wouldn't know what they were looking at anyway. Yay, Catholics, it's like we have a secret code and we didn't even know it. Right? That's just simply untrue. And yet, that's what people believe. So you have this amazing kind of reality now. Those of you, especially if you've been to the March for Life, if you've been to kind of pro-life events, you've grown up with Roe versus Wade being just the way it was, right? And every year we would go to the March for Life and it would be the same chants and it would be the same promises and nothing would change, and then we'd do it all again the next year. Repeat and repeat and repeat. But now you are living in this brand new pro-life terrain. And that's kind of exciting because it's going to be up to you. Let's face it, abortion is not going away, unfortunately, anytime really soon. It's going to be chipped away at in bits as we keep saying our prayers. But that's on you guys now. And it's on you to figure out how to navigate this kind of brave new world where this state says this and this state says this, and well, what happens if I cross state lines to go from this state to this state? Can I do that? There's going to be a whole bunch more lawsuits coming up. There's going to be a whole bunch more confusion and lies that are going to be spouted, and it's going to be up to you to refute them. It's going to be up to you to pray over them. And it's going to be up to you to continue to love the women who believe the lies, or the women who are so scared they think that abortion is still somehow their only alternative. That's on you. But that's exciting. And that's something, if you keep saying your prayers, each and every one of you is absolutely capable of doing. You don't have to have all the answers. You have to be willing to love. Find the answers, maybe. I'd like to let you guys ask some questions. I've got decades and decades. Decades and decades. That's depressing. We're old. Of experience in different facets of the pro-life movement. So what questions do you have about it? Yeah?
So, aren't there a lot of, ways, I don't know how to say this, but, is, any type of birth control, like preventative, does that like take a person almost like out of the state of grace for the church? Like if they are using a lot of these like methods so that they can withhold from getting pregnant?
It's a good question. Abortion and contraception are intrinsically linked. Contraception, according to the Catholic Church, and when we talk about contraception, we're going to talk about pills and hormones, IUDs, devices, rings and creams and jellies and everything. Okay, that's contraception. Any form of contraception is immoral. It's wrong, according to the Catholic Church. Every so often, there is a case where a woman will be prescribed a hormonal form of birth control for something that's not related to conception. OBGYNs, especially those who are not well trained in women's fertility, will prescribe birth control for acne, will prescribe it for horrible PMS, will prescribe it for a cycle that is just really out of whack. It's not immoral if that has been your situation and you have taken the birth control because of one of those things, because your doctor told you to. But what I will say is that's not actually curing anything. It's putting a Band-Aid and masking an underlying condition that needs to come out. And so if that has ever been the case for you, it's really worth it to look into a doctor who's trained in natural procreative technology. It's called NAPRO. They're trained in how to read hormone levels and thyroid levels and look at your cycle and say, oh, you know what? This is what's going on, and this is how we fix it. Birth control prescribed as a medicine, right, for symptoms, is not fixing anything. It's just masking what's going on. But back to the church's position on contraception. When it's used to contracept, to avoid pregnancy, it's wrong. Because there's a couple different reasons. One of the reasons is some forms of contraception are also what we call abortifacient, meaning they cause an early abortion. That's scary. Also wrong because the marital act, okay, sex, is meant to be unitive, meaning the unity of the two spouses, and procreative. If you are using a contraceptive of any kind, you are thwarting the procreative part of the purpose of the marital act. And in some cases, you're also thwarting the unitive. There are certain devices that you can use that it's kind of like kissing somebody with a Band-Aid, right? So that's why contraception is wrong. It stops, it prevents a couple from carrying out the purpose of that loving act and makes it into something that's selfish and not loving. Question. More questions? Yes.
I don't know if there's been anything said if it's happening or not, but what are your thoughts on the March for Life continuing to happen? Because I've heard like some people say it won't continue since Roe v. Wade was overturned, but then I've heard some people say it should continue because like to keep fighting for like laws to be passed against abortion.
I have a sneaky suspicion that the March for Life is going to continue in some form. Number one, because it's a giant moneymaker for the pro-life movement. And that sounds really crass, but it's true. And there are people who have invested their whole livelihoods into the March for Life. That's their job, it's what they do. They're not going to give it up. What I would like to see them do is if they're going to continue, it would be great if they could like move it to not being in the middle of the winter. And maybe we could like have it on the anniversary of the Dobbs decision, which was like early summer, no snow, right? We wouldn't freeze. I think that would be a fantastic idea. I do know though, over the past about 5 or 6 years, March for Life has been branching out into the states. And so that's why we have now like the Virginia March for Life. Almost every state has its own March for Life. And I think that they were wise when they started to do that, because they kind of saw the writing on the wall in the future and wanted to be in positions where the states could continue kind of tailoring the needs of a March for Life for what that state might need. Obviously here in Virginia, we might need something a little bit more drastic than Mississippi. But I don't think it's gonna go away. Any more questions?
What was it like working with Abby Johnson?
So it's hard for me to say because I got to know Abby as a friend before I became her employee. So we had this very strange relationship. In fact, Chris and I are actually her youngest son's godparents. We traveled a lot. She's an intense person. She's very driven. But because of that drive, really has an ability to inspire people. Which I think, particularly around the time that her movie came out, I think people were looking for inspiration. I think that we all you kind of get worn down, you know, like you're in the trenches, especially if you were doing something like talking to abortion clinic workers every day. You start to just kind of feel like you're carrying weight. And so to have someone who has this charismatic personality, who has this ability to inspire people, and who has a pretty dramatic story, really encouraged people. And it was really neat to see that, to see people become encouraged and kind of fired up again about what it means to be pro-life. So, yeah.
Can you tell us about being on set and the song and stuff?
Yeah, so one of the crazy things that happened was when Unplanned was being produced. Are you all familiar with the movie Unplanned? Okay, so we kind of got a really good behind the scenes look at that because, I mean, some of my closest friends were the characters, you know, in the movie. And so they all had input into the writing of the script. And that was one thing actually that Abby and Doug insisted on, was that they had to have final say on the script. And so we all helped in different ways. I helped a lot behind the scenes with social media, working with the production team and the marketing team. But also there were a couple scenes where it was my friend and I who explained to them how something would have looked, or what it would have, you know, looked like in, for instance, in Abby's bathroom after she took the first pill. The creative input for that scene was me and one of my friends. So being kind of behind the scenes like that was really fun. We did get to go to the set out in Oklahoma is where they filmed it. So we were there for the filming of several of the scenes in the movie. Spent a lot of time with Chuck and Carrie, the producers. I'm still friends with some of them. They're great people. We got to go to the premiere in Hollywood, so that was an experience. But something interesting happened with the song, the theme song, the Unplanned song by Matthew West. They pitched the music and asked recording artists, several recording artists, if they would make the song for the movie. And every single one of them said no. They did not want to be tied with a pro-life film. They thought it would hurt their record sales. And these were Christian artists. These weren't secular artists. In fact, in one of the early cuts of the movie that we watched, there were songs, you know, in the background, how every so often you have like the Rocky kind of vibe where, you know, Eye of the Tiger's playing and Rocky's chasing the chicken. Well, you know, like every movie kind of does that kind of montage. And so in one of the scenes in Unplanned, they had music from a different Christian artist. And it was perfect. Like, it was the perfect song. It vibed completely with the way the scene was going. And the recording artist would not give them rights to the song to use it. And so they were kind of coming up against production deadlines and still didn't have a song. And that's kind of a big deal for a movie. There's always a theme. And Matthew West pre-screened the movie. and was the only one who said, no, I'm gonna write the song for this. And it was shortly after, I think he had seen an ultrasound of one of his own children. And he was so inspired by seeing his little one on the ultrasound and Abby's story, which also involved an ultrasound, that he sat down and wrote the whole song, and called up the producers and said, I have your song, I'm gonna do it. And he was the only one to put his neck out. So yeah, I like to buy his singles now, just, say thank you. So yeah, good question. I almost forgot about that. I think I'm just about done with time. Are there any more questions? Look at that, it's 1:45 on the dot. I did good. All right, well, I have a new office in the convent. Come visit me if you think of more questions. But thank you guys for letting me talk to you today.
Thank you.